Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Saturday broadcast. We're here as usual to answer questions about Buddhist meditation practice. So, if you've been practicing in our tradition and you have questions about your practice, about applying your practice in daily life, or how to use the practice to tackle issues that you face, post them in the chat. Focused specifically on practical questions in this broadcast. So this isn't the time for speculation or curiosity or intellectual theory. It's about you and your practice. And if you're not practicing, or if you haven't done any practice, then we put a link on the screen to our How to Meditate book. That's where you should start. We have courses in how to on mindfulness meditation. You can take an at-home course or come to our center. So we'll spend the first 15 minutes collecting practical questions, and I will be back at 15 minutes after the hour to begin answering them. In the meantime, once you've asked your question, just spend some time in mindfulness practice, clearing your mind, sorting out your thoughts, and preparing for a wholesome Dharma session. So see you at 15 minutes after the hour. All right, it's now 15 minutes after the hour, so from here on we will close the chat to everything except questions. So if you have questions, you're still welcome to continue to post them in the chat. Again, they should be questions pertinent to you and related to mindfulness meditation practice. So if you're not clear on the type of practice that we do, again, you really shouldn't be asking questions here. You should rather read our booklet and begin to undertake the practice. Because all I'm going to tell you is, all I'm going to answer is read our booklet and start to practice. But if you have been practicing, then this is the place to ask questions about your practice.
Thank you, Bhante. We do have questions. We note everything during meditation, even dozing off for an instant. With continued practice, does mindfulness become 24/7? For example, even during sleep?
Well, with intensive practice, you can even put aside sleep, and you can practice day and night. People do this for days on end. Even there are stories, although I don't know of anyone doing it more than 7 days personally. There are stories of people doing it for months, which I believe, it becomes sustainable. No sleep, you end up entering into states of sort of stasis during sitting meditation, and your general intensive. I mean, the trouble is getting that much freedom to do that much intensive practice. But if you're able, you can make it sustainable even without sleep. But I think your question is more that is this going to be something that I have to look forward to, like a way to live my life? But I don't think that's quite a good understanding of what the practice is for. This practice is leading out of samsara. This is a really profound thing. I mean, this is a path that doesn't end in you continuing your wandering in samsara mindfully. It really helps you let go of samsara, so everything changes. And once you've reached the end, no, you don't have to keep noting, but to get there requires pretty intensive practice. So yeah, the actual path will involve periods of intensive noting for sure, day and night. But not during sleep. Sleep doesn't allow for that. That's you just you'd put aside sleep when you really get into it.
How do we deal with boredom? I note boredom, but it is persistent. It is more difficult when at work.
Well, noting isn't to get rid of things, and part of what you're realizing is that you're not in control. So how do we deal with it? Kind of, and your description kind of suggests that you have an expectation of being able to control the boredom, right? Deal with it. But I mean, deal with it is a good way of putting it. But the thing is, to deal with it, you deal with it rather than try to make it go away. You change your interactions both with it and with the things that you are bored of, because there's nothing boring about anything you experience. Boring isn't an inherent quality, so it's on you. It's a bad habit, but it's a habit, you see, and you can't just turn it off. It's habitual. It's kind of like instinctual, knee jerk. So you can't just say, no, I'm not going to behave that way. Well, you are, because that's what you're habitually inclined to do. You have to change your habit, and the biggest part of the change is to become have a clearer mind about it, and the clarity of mind will circumvent, no, will preempt, no, will prevent you from getting bored. It's just seen as not the right response. It's not valuable to get bored. Boredom is based on disliking. It's an anger-based mind state, so it's not valuable. It's the boredom that's the problem. And when you start to see that, and see how unwieldy and unpleasant it is, you just become less inclined to get bored.
I find it difficult to remain mindful and steadfast when confronted by someone who asks for help or comfort. It later affects my mental state and focus. How can I deal with an overflow of compassion?
Well, it's difficult to remain mindful. So to start off, if we ended it there, if we just take that first statement at face value, I would remark that yes, that's to be expected. Doesn't actually mean anything in terms of changing your practice. Like, it's difficult, therefore I should do something differently. Nope, it's difficult. That's just the way it is. So finding it difficult to remain mindful and steadfast isn't something that you need to fix per se. I mean, it gets easier as you get better at it, and that's all it takes. Is you have to persist, and like any training or any skill, it gets easier as you get better at it. So yeah, not being able to be mindful will affect your mental state and focus. But you see, the great thing about early mindful practice is it helps you see all this. It's not. I mean, it's not, shouldn't be anything surprising. It's just you're now understanding these very important truths, that your inability to be mindful due to your lack of skill is causing you to react, or it's allowing for these unwholesome reactions to arise. There's not really any such thing as an overflow of compassion. The way we'd put it is a corruption of compassion, or a failure of compassion. And what that means is compassion has turned into something that is not compassion, but it's something like sadness, or cruelty. Cruelty is the opposite of compassion, but sadness is it's called the near enemy of compassion. Like cruelty is the far enemy, meaning the opposite. But there's a near enemy as well, and that's what you might say would the overflowing, and it's not the overflowing, again, it's the corruption. The corruption of compassion leads to sadness. You get sad when you see other people suffering and so on. But you may also be saying, how do I say no to people who ask for help or comfort? And I'm not really sure why you would do that. I mean, shouldn't really be the norm. The only reason you would do that is if you're really sure that it's not beneficial to do so, which, yeah, there's certainly cases of that, but you should be open to helping people. Try to be careful about not just rejecting people out of hand. Yeah, you don't want to take the stance that, I shouldn't be compassionate, of course, right? Try to help people when you can. It's not just for them. It really is for your own good, because as you can see, you feel guilty about not helping and worried that maybe you did something wrong, and it really is kind of wrong. I mean, it's much better for you and makes you feel happy and good about yourself when you do help people. Good for your practice. Helping others, you help yourself.
I have the predicament that I have fewer desires and enjoy more peace, but also miss having more desires and being more motivated to achieve things. Any advice on how to handle this?
Miss having more desires. That's probably not accurate. I don't see how that can be that, I wish I wanted more things. I don't know I think you have to be a little bit clearer about what you're actually experiencing. What could that be? I mean, there's certainly the fear of losing the things, losing desire. There can be boredom when you're not getting anything. But yeah, it can just be this ideology, this not ideology, this sort of intellectual idea, and the mere idea of not having anything to please you, not being pleased by anything, is still just desire for pleasure, craving for pleasure, or attachment for pleasure. I mean, you should just know there can be fear. So you may not miss having more desires, and being more motivated to achieve things. There's still going to be some desire. It means you have a desire to achieve things. There can be ego involved, a desire to be a person who has achieved things. There can be low self-esteem or a judgment of yourself, like I'm a nobody, and because you have this ego, that you feel you have to be somebody in order to mean anything, that sort of thing. I mean, it's probably a lot simpler than you're actually making it out to be, and you should just note what you're experiencing. There's nothing remarkable about this. They're just experiences. So try to see them as the simple experiences, usually of liking, disliking, worry, fear, that sort of thing, wanting, doubt, confusion, that sort of thing. Also, the enjoying peace, you have to be careful about. That can be a liking, because enjoying peace there's nothing special about that. That's just liking. If you like the feeling of peace, you're still attached to it. Nothing special about feelings of peace. They're generally a good sign, a sign that you're a good person and you have wholesome qualities of mind. But as soon as you cling to them, you're no longer in that category. You're now bad. You're now clinging, and you're going to cause yourself suffering.
I was wondering how important it is to continue using the mantras. I find it now distracting, and I can focus better now during both my walking and sitting meditation sessions without it.
Yeah, well, focus is one thing. We're not looking for focus. We're looking for clarity, and quite a different thing. What you're actually finding likely is that it's easier and more comfortable, which we describe as focus, but that's misleading. Mindfulness is meant to challenge you, and it doesn't distract you, but it opens you up to distraction, especially because you're not very good at it in the beginning. It takes time to be skilled at it. Mindfulness is not going to focus you on one thing. It's not going to allow you to be free from thought. But those thoughts aren't that distracted thoughts aren't caused by mindfulness. That's just ordinary reality. There are meditations that you're probably inclined towards that silence that thinking mind. But that's not what mindfulness is about. With mindfulness, we're trying to see the normal states of mind. We're trying to ordinary states of mind, and to understand them. So when you're distracted, you should say distracted, distracted. And that's not going to stop you from being distracted. It's going to help you understand that you're not in charge. And you trying to be in charge is just leading to more attachment, more partiality. You're more partial to this focused state that you have during meditation than ordinary states when you're not meditating. And that partiality is just going to cause stress and suffering. It's deeper than what you're thinking, what your understanding is. So the why you'd use the mantras is because you're trying to go deeper than just focus. Focus isn't in and of itself valuable. I mean, okay, that's not fair. It's not in and of itself enough or as valuable as seeing clearly. So eventually you got to let go of it and this preference towards it. Buddha said, even when you're unfocused, you have to learn to be mindful of that. That's the trick. Even when your mind is unfocused, you're aware that your mind is unfocused. That's what you have to do, not make your mind focused. Look at the Satipatthana Sutta. The Buddha doesn't say that. It says when your mind is unfocused, you know that the mind is unfocused. That's practice. Very different. It's deeper than ordinary meditation. That's why we use the noting.
During meditation, I find that I become relaxed and my eyes will open very slightly, involuntarily. Should I make an effort to close them all the way again while noting, or just let them be and note?
Your eyes should stay closed, so close them again. But the real issue here is the relaxation. Again, this kind of with the last person, same as with the last person. You should note relaxed, and you're probably not noting it. It's very common to forget to note it or overlook it. So I'll say this. Let me say this in general because there's 54 people listening, and you all should be aware that many of you are probably not noting relaxed states, calm states, and it's really just a sign that you didn't read the book carefully enough, or you didn't internalize the teachings. We have a blind spot for pleasant states, and the book is pretty clear, I think, that you have to note calm states and relaxed states. And it deals with the answer, or it relates back to the answer to the last question as well. We're not trying to find these states. These are not the point. Being relaxed is kind of meaningless, but it's no better than a unrelaxed state from the perspective of mindfulness, because we don't make those judgments. That's the whole point. We try to see things just as they are. So when you're relaxed, you are aware of relaxed. You say relaxed, relaxed, or calm, calm. When you're restless or anxious or whatever, you also don't judge that. Anxious, anxious, stressed, stressed. So but lots of things. See, what happens when you don't notice, things start to go all haywire or askew or amok, or everything goes to pot. And that's where you find these descriptions. And then my eyes opened, or there's other things that happen. And then I saw bright lights, and then some magical thing happened. Why? Because you lost track of mindfulness, and your mind just sort of went off on its own fantasy land. Lots of things happen. And it's usually because you weren't noting the relaxation. I mean, it's evidence as to how ordinary tranquil meditation leads you to such special states, and that's really what it's for. It can lead even to magical powers, super normal awarenesses, and so on. But it can't lead you to wisdom. It's not of that sort. So if you want to practice mindfulness, it's actually beyond any kind of special experiences. I mean, it may not seem like your eyes opening involuntarily is a special experience, but it kind of is. I mean, it's something that happens involuntarily, and it normally shouldn't happen like that, right? Why does it happen? Because you've lost the thread. You're no longer being mindful, usually because you didn't note the relaxation or the liking of it. You also don't note that. And both of those you should note.
Do you recommend any mudras during meditation?
Have you read my booklet? If I didn't have it well, I don't know. I shouldn't be, but read the booklet. And if you've read the booklet, try and understand what I'm teaching and how well, let me put it this way. Physical experiences should be noted. They shouldn't be given any significance. So even your posture doesn't really matter. Like, are you standing, walking, sitting, lying, or crouching? If you're crouching or leaning or standing on your head, you should be mindful of all these things. And so a mudra wouldn't have any significance. That's that kind of question. It shows a lack of understanding of the practice. But even people who have read the booklet might still have that, and you really have to. It really just shows that you haven't gained the understanding of mindfulness and how simple and practical and ordinary it is. Mindfulness is a very simple and very real thing. Mudras are not real, they're symbolic, and symbolism has no place in reality or mindfulness. It's meaning making. If you give meaning to a hand position, you've already lost your connection with reality.
I sometimes have experiences of awe, space, light, familiarity, sinking, or vibration. Are these words too intellectual for noting?
No, awe is fine. Space is okay. Yeah. Light is okay. I mean, I would note seeing just to keep it simple. Familiarity, yeah, that's okay. Sinking is okay. Vibration, all those are fine. Yeah.
Is it bad for a person who keeps the 5 precepts to offer alcohol to another who does not?
Yeah, that's pretty bad. I mean, if someone asks for alcohol, I think there is a small, like, my example is if you're a waiter in a restaurant and someone asks you for alcohol, you could say, I'm just bringing them this bottle. I'm not encouraging them to drink. I'm not appreciating or expressing approval of their drinking. I'm just doing my job, and that's my job, to bring people things. So as a waiter, I think you're in the clear. But you're talking about offering people alcohol, so yeah, that's crossing a line pretty much. There's not really any way you could, I think, uh, no circumstances that would absolve you of the unwholesomeness of offering if you're offering people alcohol. Oh no, there's one, and that's if someone has a cut and you offer them alcohol, rubbing alcohol. But rubbing alcohol will make you blind if you drink it, so it's a different kind of alcohol, and I assume you're not talking about that. Of course, I think grain alcohol also is good for wounds. So I think if you pour vodka on a wound, it's still okay. If it's topical, alcohol is okay. It's for topical application.
Why does a lifetime of suffering caused by addictions not help the addict to see the error of his ways and change course? How does meditation allow the change to happen, while suffering in non-meditative, unmindful daily life does not?
Well, you say it yourself, unmindful. If you're unmindful, how could you learn from suffering? How could you see clearly and understand the nature of suffering? Suffering isn't about experiencing suffering. It isn't about suffering. Right? The first noble truth is isn't suffer. The first noble truth is fully understand suffering. That's not the same as just suffer. You don't realize the Four Noble Truths by suffering. Otherwise, everybody in hell would be all enlightened, right? You have to fully understand, parinyaya, fully understand or comprehend suffering. And that only comes about, that doesn't even require you to quote unquote suffer. Because suffering is deeper than that. What it really means is the unsatisfying nature, or things that are unsatisfying. And everything that arises is unsatisfying or unable to satisfy. Not worth clinging to is the real point. And that's what you see. That's what you understand, is that nothing is worth clinging to. And the only way you can understand that is through mindfulness. So you're suffering a lot. I mean, it can shock you into asking the right questions and potentially lead you towards mindfulness. It's very common, actually, for people who suffer a lot to seek out a solution, whereas people who don't suffer a lot sometimes never seek out the solution. But it's not always the case. It's more a case of whether the person has great goodness in them.
Do the fruits of practice inevitably lead to monkhood, deterministically? The clarity gained from the practice may have removed defilements, but I find reality and life more challenging and paradoxical.
Yeah, I wouldn't overthink it. I would say it will incline you towards a simpler life, and that's what the monastic life is. So if you have the opportunity to ordain, quite beneficial to do so.
In one sense, encountering the practice has been detrimental to my life, in another, liberating. Is this a state of withdrawal, ignorance, and we must muster up? Will this feeling eventually diminish?
Well, that's not really the right question. A better question would be, what should I do, perhaps? But the answer is simply to note these states. You shouldn't try to make sense out of them, like, is this right or wrong, or will this change, or should this change? You should, or is this the way the practice is supposed to be? No. Is this how I'm supposed to feel when I practice mindfulness? These are not the right questions. Mindfulness isn't about what you experience. It's about your responses to your experience. And it's about sort of preempting your responses, getting ahead of them. Sati niwarayang, sati tesang niwarayang. Yani sotani lokasming ya, sati tesang niwarayang. Whatever dreams there may be in the world, mindfulness is there, is that which dams them, which blocks the stream. So this is poetic language. I think it was that quote is from a conversation with an angel, and angels have very poetic language. So the point is, any kind of attachment or bad habit you have, mindfulness prevents it. So how that relates to your question, what I mean to say, or why I bring that up, is because what you should do is note these experiences. So whatever this experience is that makes you think that it's detrimental to your life, you should just note those experiences. It's not really indicative of the practice. The practice is going to shake things up, but all mindfulness does is give you wisdom, and you can never say that wisdom is bad for you. That's the not unfortunate, but the killer argument against such complaints. The that which nullifies any arguments against mindfulness is that you can't argue that wisdom is bad for you. It can be bad, but I think and the point is, what you're getting at is probably that sort of thing, that you can see how it's interfering with you engaging in what are actually activities based on delusion or ignorance, and you can no longer engage with them because you're no longer deluded or ignorant. And that's kind of unfortunate in a practical sense, but in a very in a conventional sense, but in a very real sense, it's quite fortunate, because you'll never have the consequences of engaging in deluded activities or ignorance-based activities. But the real point that I was trying to make is that you can't say that this or that is the way the practice is supposed to be. You just have to be mindful and try to see clearly the new experiences. Because it can be a real challenge in the beginning, even conventionally. Like, it challenges relationships. It can put you at odds with people you love because they don't understand the changes in you, and you can no longer identify with them or sympathize with their inclinations and that sort of thing. So in the beginning, it can be quite a disturbance, conventionally, in a worldly sense. And so your question about whether feelings should eventually diminish, it's not really how you should look at it. Just try and be mindful of the feelings and try and see what you're actually feeling on a momentary basis. And when bad feelings diminish, it's because you stop clinging to them or you stop feeding them. So I guess the answer is ultimately yes, it will eventually diminish, whatever bad feeling you're referring to.
Is the strength of the mind a property of vinnana, or is wisdom technically not classified in the 5 khandhas, or 6 senses, which we call reality?
There's nothing outside of the 5 khandhas except nibbana, so I don't know if you could classify nibbana as wisdom. No, wisdom is a quality of the mind. It's actually called asamoha, which means lack of delusion. So it just means having clarity. Wisdom in Buddhism is clarity. But then you talk about strength of mind, and you're identifying strength of mind with wisdom, but that's not really what wisdom is. Again, wisdom is this lack of delusion. Strength of mind could be confidence, could be concentration is a very common one. And not really a very useful question. I mean, whatever it is, it's good, right? So try and to cultivate it.
While meditating, it is my understanding that noting should be simple, such as hearing, noting a sensation like pain, or noting thinking when my mind wanders. Is it correct to note in simple terms?
Yeah, reasonably simple, but not too simple. I know some people just start noting feeling for everything. If they feel anger, they say feeling. If they want something, they say feeling, because technically it's all just a feeling, but that's really unhelpful. It's not, it's not, it's not wrong in an ultimate sense. It's just far less useful than noting anger or liking or worried. If you're worried, you shouldn't just say feeling because you feel worried, right? Pretty simple to say worried. And other people will note distracted for everything. If something distracts them, like if they're angry and that's the distraction, they say distracted. Or if they hear something, they'll say distracted because they're distracted by the hearing. If they think that, so everything is just distracted. And that's also quite unhelpful. It's, again, not technically wrong, but it's far less helpful than actually noting the experience. So it's rather than saying the simplest note is the best, because then you could just note experiencing for everything, right? No matter what it is, just say experiencing. That would be pretty useless. Not entirely useless, but far less helpful. Yeah, it wouldn't be very useful at all. So rather than say the simplest note, you should probably say a more moderate note. Don't be too technical or too specific, and certainly don't get into the details of things like noting what you're seeing, because that gets into convention and conception. Try and note the actual experience.
Could you please give advice about laziness? I don't have the desire to work a worldly job. I'm curious about what you'd have to say about laziness and how to mindfully deal with it or work with it.
Be a less lazy person. Laziness isn't something that a good meditator has to deal with. It's a sign that you are a bad meditator. So it's a lazy question. It's a common question, and that's why I'm so hard here, is because I'm not actually attacking you. This is going to be hard on everyone for asking this question. No, I don't have any specific advice for laziness. You're just lazy. You're just not a very good meditator. If you were a good meditator, you wouldn't be lazy. And really, it's not. I don't really. I'm not really trying to be hard on you. I'm just. Let's be clear here that this is our problem. We're lazy, and if we weren't so lazy, well, or if we were a better meditator, we wouldn't be so lazy. Or if we weren't so lazy, we'd be a better meditator. But it just means you're not a very good meditator. What's my advice? Do more meditation. And I mean, even that, it's just going to take time because you're too lazy to meditate. It's on you. That's your problem. You got work to do. Shape up or ship out. No, shape up or ship on. You're gonna wander through samsara for eternity. Laziness is just a sign that the person is not developed as an individual. And again, it's most people. It's really not singling you out. I'm not saying, oh, listen to this person. They're substandard human. No, most people are like this. That's why we get this question so often. But we get it as out of laziness. You're asking this question because you're lazy. That's not quite fair, but kind of. No, you don't have to ask this question. You just have to work harder. And it's up to you to work harder. It's up to me to tell you to work harder. You know what's a really good way is associate yourself with people who are not lazy, because they give you a good example. They set a good example. And the best way to do that is, of course, to undertake a meditation course with a teacher who's going to give you a kick in the pants. They'll keep pushing you, and they'll help push you to work harder. A lot easier to be lazy when you don't have support.
What does it mean in the Satipatthana Sutta when it's said that we should contemplate the seeing in the seeing, the hearing in the hearing, etc.?
Yeah, the word contemplate isn't in the Satipatthana Sutta. This is something I've talked about in our study group. It's not the word that's used, and it's quite unfortunate that the translators chose to use that incorrect translation. This is one of the times where I won't just say, I don't agree with it. I'll say, this is wrong. And it's problematic, right? Because people then ask this question. It doesn't say that. It literally doesn't say anything about contemplating. It doesn't even connotate. You know what it says? It says sees, seeing, in regards to seeing. See is the body in regards to the body, right? It's hinting at vipassana, which means seeing clearly. That's what mindfulness leads to. It leads you to see things. But this statement in seeing in the seeing, which means it means in regards to seeing, you see it as seeing, and that's why we say to ourselves seeing. And so that's all that you see about it. You don't see it as a dog or a cat or a person. When in seeing, you just see seeing. You just are aware of seeing. No contemplation required. None even mentioned. Would be wrong practice to start contemplating. So I think it comes from people not practicing themselves and trying to interpret it in an intellectual sense. That's not very charitable, but I can't think of it as anything but that. It's just wrong translation.
When you begin to see your intentions more clearly, it seems that every thought and act seems to be associated with that intention. Do intentions disappear eventually, or just purify?
I think you're overthinking things. I don't really have any comment on this question. When you have intentions, you should note them. Your acts, you should try to note them as well. I think you're making more out of this than it actually is. So your question as far as do intentions disappear eventually? Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that. You just, your impure intentions disappear, so they don't purify, but intentions, of course, disappear. Intentions are momentary, and the next moment after they arise, they disappear. That's the nature of reality. But unwholesome intentions no longer arise for one who is enlightened, of course. So you only have pure intentions arising.
What do I do when anxiety makes me physically ill? I note anxiety, but deep down, I want to feel better because the negative state is unsustainable.
No, you should note wanting for sure. But anxiety doesn't, I mean, physically ill, it certainly gives rise to physical symptoms, but you should note those as physical so that you don't get anxious about them, because that just snowballs, right? It creates a feedback loop. You get anxious about the results of anxiety, and that makes you more anxious. And you also dislike the feelings, and that leads to anger and frustration and depression and that sort of thing. So you have to learn to see the physical sensations objectively without judging them as bad or ill. I mean, there's nothing wrong with using the word ill because that is a good description. It's just when that becomes pejorative in your mind, then the reaction is anger and disliking of those states, of those physical states, when in fact they're just physical states, and you really would be best served by seeing them neutrally as just physical states. Then you wouldn't react to them. You wouldn't get upset because of them. So try and separate the anxiety from the physical states and note them both. Note the anxiety, note the physical states, and note the disliking the physical states, because that's the real problem there. There's no such thing as a negative state. There's just your reactions to it, which are negative.
Why is using a universal term such as feeling not as helpful as using a more direct term such as boredom, anger, etc.?
Well, you kind of answer it there. It's more direct, but I think this question just comes from lack of experience. There's no way that just saying feeling for everything is going to be all that beneficial. Try it. Try and actually practice. I told you how to practice. Do it, and this sort of question couldn't come up here. You just got to see it for yourself. You get far better clarity using actual terms rather than kind of a cop out just saying feeling all the time. But you should see that for yourself through the practice. I mean, this question is kind of just a curiosity question.
In regards to the meditation practice, what would you say is the true purpose and meaning of being consciously mindful?
Seeing clearly. Have you read our booklet? The goal of the purpose of mindfulness is to see clearly. To see clearly what? To see clearly the three characteristics: impermanent, suffering, and non-self. Because when you see those things, you lose your delusions of things being stable, satisfying, and controllable, and so you become independent of them, no longer clinging to them, no longer requiring them, so no longer dependent on anything. That's freedom. When you're free, you can say, I'm free. There's nothing more to do.
You say relaxation is useless, but isn't it one of the 7 factors of enlightenment?
No, relaxation isn't. You could say passaddhi, which is tranquility. I mean, that's just, passaddhi means like quieting of the mind. So yeah, when the mind quiets down, that's one of the 7 factors, but relaxation isn't. Relaxation is, I mean, the thing is, even the 7 factors of enlightenment, if you were to identify or equate relaxation with tranquility, because they're just words, right? It's still useless if it's not associated with the other 7 factors. And the only way any of them are useful is if they're directed by mindfulness. Mindfulness is the only one of those 7 factors that is universally to be cultivated. The others are going to be things you have to balance with each other. So if you just talk about relaxation, that's useless. But if you practice mindfulness, there is a way you could say it relaxes you. It's not what I would say. I wouldn't say it's entirely accurate, but I'd say it quiets the mind down. But it's only because of the mindfulness that it's of any use or value. So if you're not noting relaxed, you're just giving free rein to delusion and most likely craving or attachment.
As I am getting more aware, I am feeling distant from family, friends, relatives. I feel like a square peg in a round hole around them. Is this normal?
Doesn't matter whether it's normal, it's what you experience. Mindfulness isn't it isn't the point to give you different experiences or specific experiences, though it will, of course. It will give you specific experiences, but it's not about those experiences. It's about your awareness and your clarity about those experiences. So what happens is when you gain a greater clarity, your life starts to change, and the way you look at things starts to change. But it's not a pure process, because you're not a pure meditator, right? So you're also going to have all sorts of ideas. You'll make mistakes in the practice, and those mistakes can be quite powerful. And if you don't have a guidance of a teacher, you can even practice wrongly. With mindfulness, there's not much danger of that as long as you follow the instructions. It's not that common to hear about people practicing mindfulness really wrong, going wrong, or that sort of thing. But it's imperfect. And so you're going to make mistakes. You're going to alienate people. You're going to start getting... Meditators often get quite conceited, like, I know better than you because you're not a meditator, and dismissive of other people, you know, can be belligerent towards others, try to tell other people what to do because now I know better because now I'm a meditator. You know, all these things. It's imperfect. You can't blame mindfulness on everything. But ultimately, in a purest sense, your question is not really important. Not important whether it's normal. It's what you're experiencing. And the best thing you can do remains to be mindful of it. Why? Because that helps you to see it more clearly. It's quite simple. This isn't a cultish practice or some kind of occult practice. It's a very simple practice, and it's a very simple goal, is to see it more clearly. So when you see it more clearly, you're less distorted about it. Have less corruption, like less perversion. But by perversion, I just mean distortion. Like you have less wrong reactions to it, right? Because you can only have wrong reactions if you misunderstand something. That's the definition of wrong, right? That's why we call them wrong. So it can only be wrong if you misunderstand the situation. Once you start to understand the situation, your reactions are better, more right. So, yeah, when you experience these things, just the only answer is to be mindful of them.
Thank you, Bhante. We've crossed the hour and you've answered all the questions in the top tier.
Okay, well, thank you all for your questions. May everyone benefit from this session and benefit from their practice, more importantly, and find peace, happiness, and freedom from suffering. Thank you to the volunteers for your help, especially Chris, who's always here to lead the charge. Have a good week, everyone. Sadhu.
Sadhu.